The discovery in the dark. The wind howled through the alley, sending loose newspapers tumbling across the pavement like ghosts from forgotten stories. The air smelled of damp asphalt, rotting food, and the distant scent of burnt coffee wafting from Lily's cafe, just around the corner. Officer Daniel Hayes had been on patrol for the last 6 hours, his mind already drifting to thoughts of the warm dinner his wife had promised to leave in the oven. His radio crackled to life. Possible disturbance reported near Hanover Street, behind Lily's cafe. Could be an animal, but investigate. Over. Daniel sighed, rubbing a hand over his tired face. Figures, he muttered. The alley behind Lily's was a frequent hotspot for stray cats, raccoons, and sometimes even intoxicated drifters. He had handled it all before. Still, something gnawed at his instincts. As he pulled his patrol car to the curb, he stepped out, flashlight in hand. The night air was crisp, carrying a bone-deep chill that made him zip his jacket higher. The glow from a flickering street lamp barely reached the alley's end, leaving deep shadows to creep along the graffitied walls. Then he heard it, a sound so soft that, at first, he thought he had imagined it. A faint whimper. His grip tightened on the flashlight as he scanned the alley. The sound came again, this time slightly louder. A muffled, fragile cry, like a whisper lost in the wind. A chill ran down his spine. He followed the sound, stepping carefully over shattered glass and an overturned trash can. The cry was coming from inside the dumpster. His heart pounded. "Shit," he breathed, rushing forward. With a gloved hand, he gripped the dumpster's heavy lid and threw it open. The stench of spoiled food and old garbage filled his nostrils, but that wasn't what made his stomach twist. There, lying in a heap of torn rags and dirty plastic bags, was a newborn baby, his breath caught in his throat. The tiny infant, so impossibly small, was shivering, his face red from crying, his fists clenched in a weak, helpless struggle. The baby's bare skin was damp, his body wrapped in nothing but a thin, blood-stained cloth. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. Jesus Christ. Without thinking, he reached in, scooping the infant into his arms. The baby was ice cold. How long had he been lying there? Hours? A whole night? A few minutes longer, and he might not have survived. Daniel pressed the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Officer Hayes. I need an ambulance at my location now. I have an abandoned newborn. Alive, but severely hypothermic. We need immediate medical assistance." The baby let out another frail cry, pressing his tiny face against Daniel's chest, seeking warmth. "Hold on, little guy," Daniel murmured, wrapping his jacket around the infant. "You're not alone. Not anymore." But as the sirens wailed in the distance, Daniel couldn't shake the uneasy feeling curling in his gut. Who had left the baby here? And why? He looked down at the helpless child in his arms, knowing that this moment, this one decision, would change both of their lives forever. A name for the forgotten. The emergency room was a blur of movement and voices. Nurses rushed to take the infant from Daniel's arms, their gloved hands swift and gentle as they placed the baby in an incubator, attaching monitors to his tiny limbs. Daniel stood just outside the glass, his hand still slightly trembling. His jacket, now discarded in a chair, was damp from the baby's fragile body heat. "Officer Hayes." Daniel turned to see a Dr. Emily Carter, a pediatric specialist, stepping toward him. She looked tired but determined, her expression unreadable. "How is he?" Daniel asked immediately. "He's stable," she said, "dehydrated, malnourished, and his body temperature was dangerously low, but we got to him just in time. Another hour, and he might not have made it." Daniel exhaled, relief and anger intertwining in his chest. "Do we know how long he was out there?" Dr. Carter shook her head. "Hard to say. Judging by the umbilical cord, I'd estimate he was born less than 12 hours ago." Daniel's stomach twisted. 12 hours. That meant someone had given birth to him. And then, what? Dumped him like garbage. Or was there more to the story? The nurse at the station called out, "We need a name for the file." Dr. Carter turned to Daniel. "No family has come forward yet. If we don't have a name, Child Services will assign one." A name. Daniel turned back to the glass window, staring at the newborn's tiny chest rising and falling. He thought of how fiercely the baby had fought to survive, how despite the odds, he had clung to life. "Luke," Daniel said, the name forming on his lips before he even realized it. Dr. Carter gave him a soft smile. "Luke?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, call him Luke." The nurse wrote it down. "Luke Hayes?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. Hayes. He had no right to claim this child. But in that moment, something inside him wanted to. "No," he said finally. "Just Luke. For now." The questions begin. A few hours later, Daniel sat in the hospital waiting room, flipping through his notepad. He had taken down every detail, the location, the baby's condition, the lack of any identifying clues. The only evidence was the blood-stained cloth the baby had been wrapped in. Forensics confirmed it belonged to the mother. Daniel's fingers tightened around his pen. If they could find the mother, they could get answers. Why had she abandoned her child? Was she forced to? Was she in danger? Or had she wanted the baby gone? Just as he was lost in thought, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. It was his partner, Detective Ryan Davis. "You're still at the hospital." Ryan's voice came through. "Yeah," Daniel muttered. "Good. You're gonna want to hear this." The cloth the baby was wrapped in, it wasn't just bloodied. It was ripped from an expensive designer dress. Daniel sat up straighter. That doesn't make sense. If the mother was wealthy, why abandon her baby in a dumpster? "That's the million-dollar question," Ryan said grimly. "But here's the kicker. We ran a search through missing persons. And guess what? We found a match." Daniel's grip tightened around the phone. "Her name is Leah Mercer," Ryan continued. "She was reported missing just hours before you found the baby." Daniel's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a case of abandonment. Something bigger was at play. And if Leah Mercer was missing, then where was she now? A call from the past. The soft hum of hospital machines filled the quiet room, their rhythmic beeping marking the fragile heartbeat of the newborn. Luke, Officer Daniel Hayes, sat in the dimly lit waiting area, his mind restless, the weight of the discovery pressing heavily on his shoulders. A baby abandoned in a dumpster. A missing woman, Leah Mercer, reported just hours before the baby was found. The pieces didn't fit. Daniel had been a cop for 15 years, and he knew when something didn't add up. This wasn't just a case of neglect. Something bigger was at play. His fingers hovered over his phone as he reread the text Detective Ryan Davis had sent earlier. Leah Mercer, 22, last seen leaving the Market Hotel around 10 p.m. Reported missing by her employer. Daniel exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Leah wasn't just any woman. She worked at one of the most prestigious high-end hotels in the city, the kind of place that catered to politicians, CEOs, and social elites. What was she doing giving birth alone in an alleyway, only to vanish without a trace? Had she willingly abandoned her child, or had she been forced to? And if so, by who? His thoughts were interrupted by a commotion at the hospital entrance. A man in an expensive suit, hair perfectly styled, stormed through the double doors, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the tile floor. His eyes, sharp and furious, scanned the room until they landed on a nurse at the reception desk. "I'm here about the baby," he demanded. "The one that was found earlier. His mother is my fiancée, and I want answers." Daniel's instincts flared to life. This wasn't just some grieving boyfriend. Something about his demeanor was off. He pushed himself up from his chair and made his way over. "Officer Hayes, NYPD." Daniel introduced himself, flashing his badge. "And you are?" The man turned, his expression shifting into something cold and calculating. Michael Stanton, he said smoothly. Leah Mercer is my fiancée, and I need to know where she is. A web of lies. Daniel studied Michael Stanton carefully. His perfectly tailored suit, manicured hands, and confident stance didn't fit the profile of a man who had just lost his fiancée or who was worried about a missing child. Something in his tone didn't ring true. If Leah Mercer is your fiancée, why did her employer report her missing and not you? Daniel asked, narrowing his eyes. Michael's jaw clenched. She left the hotel without telling me. I assumed she went home. But when I didn't hear from her, I got worried. Daniel crossed his arms. You assumed she went home. You're telling me she was heavily pregnant, and you just lost track of her. Michael's lips pressed into a thin line. Before he could respond, a nurse appeared. Excuse me, Officer Hayes. Daniel turned. We got a call about the baby. She hesitated. From a blocked number. A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. Who was on the line? The nurse looked uneasy. It was a woman. She sounded scared. She only said one thing before she hung up. Daniel felt his pulse spike. What did she say? The nurse swallowed. She whispered, Please, don't let him take my baby. The chase begins. Daniel's gut twisted. The mother, Leah Mercer, was alive. Somewhere out there, she was running for her life. And the way Michael Stanton's jaw ticked when he heard those words, it told Daniel everything he needed to know. Michael wasn't here out of concern. He was hunting her down. Daniel straightened, his body shifting into full-on detective mode. He had spent years learning how to read people, how to see what they weren't saying. And right now, Michael was hiding something big. Tell me something, Mr. Stanton, Daniel said coolly. You say you were engaged to Leah. Were you also aware that she was missing for over 12 hours, or that your fiancé was found giving birth alone in an alleyway? Michael's face remained expressionless, but his hands tensed. A subtle movement, but Daniel caught it. I told you, Michael said smoothly. I didn't know where she was. If Leah was in trouble, she should have come to me. Maybe she was trying to, Daniel said. Or maybe she was running from you. Michael's eyes darkened. You have no idea what you're talking about, officer, he said quietly, his voice laced with hidden anger. Daniel smirked. We'll see about that. Turning on his heel, he pulled out his phone and dialed Detective Davis. Ryan, he said the moment his partner picked up, I need everything you can find on Michael Stanton. There was a pause. Stanton. Ryan's tone immediately sharpened. As in the Stanton family. Daniel frowned. Yeah, you know him. Ryan exhaled. You could say that. The Stanton family is one of the most powerful names in the city. Real estate tycoons, political donors. Hell, they have more connections than half the people running for mayor. Daniel's stomach dropped. If Leah Mercer was involved with them. Ryan hesitated. Then she didn't just disappear. Someone made sure she vanished. Daniel clenched his jaw. He turned back toward the hospital entrance, but Michael was gone. Just like that. He had disappeared. Daniel swore under his breath. Leah Mercer was running from something. And now the man she was afraid of had just vanished into the night. The call that changed everything. Hours later, Daniel sat in his patrol car staring at his phone. The baby, Luke, was safe under hospital protection, but Leah was still missing. Then suddenly, his phone rang. An unknown number. His breath caught as he answered. This is Officer Hayes. Silence. Then, a soft, shaking voice. Officer Hayes. His pulse spiked. Yes. Who is this? A pause. Then, my name is Leah Mercer. I need your help. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. Leah, he said carefully. Where are you? Her voice broke. I don't know. They're looking for me. He is looking for me. Michael Stanton. Daniel's heart pounded. Leah, listen to me. I found your baby. He's safe. A sharp, shaken inhale on the other end. You You found him, she whispered, voice cracking. Yes, he's alive. He's okay. But I need to get to you, right now. She hesitated. If I tell you where I am, you have to promise me something. Anything, Daniel said immediately. Her voice dropped to a fearful whisper. Promise me you won't let him take my baby. Daniel felt the weight of those words settle deep in his chest. I promise, Leah, he swore. Now tell me where you are. A pause. Then, in a voice so small and broken, she whispered, I think they're coming for me. Then, the line went dead. Daniel's blood ran ice cold. He threw his car into drive. He was running out of time. Varied secrets and a desperate escape. The moment the line went dead, Daniel Hayes felt his stomach drop. The fear in Leah Mercer's voice still echoed in his ears. I think they're coming for me. He had no time to waste. He hit the button on his radio. Dispatch, this is Officer Hayes. I have a missing person in immediate danger. Suspected kidnapping or attempted harm. I need all available units to track a call from an unknown number. Victim's name, Leah Mercer. Static. Then, copy that, Officer Hayes. We'll pull phone records and get a trace started. Estimated location incoming. His hands tightened on the wheel as he pulled out of the hospital parking lot, his patrol car screeching onto the wet streets. Rain had started falling, making the city glow under neon reflections of streetlights. Leah was out there, alone, running, terrified. And Michael Stanton was hunting her. But Daniel wasn't about to let him win. A city of shadows. Daniel gripped the wheel as his phone rang again. Detective Ryan Davis. You got something? Daniel asked sharply. Ryan let out a breath. Yeah, the call came from a burner phone, but we traced the last signal to a location on the outskirts. An abandoned motel on Harbor Street. Daniel's gut clenched. Harbor Street. That area's a ghost town. Ryan's voice was grim. Exactly. If she's hiding there, she's either desperate or trapped. Either way, she doesn't have much time. Daniel gritted his teeth. I'm heading there now. Meet me. Already on my way, Ryan replied. And done. Be careful. If Stanton's involved, this goes deeper than just a missing persons case. Daniel already knew that. He just didn't realize how deep it really went. A mother's fear. The abandoned motel was barely standing. The neon sign buzzed faintly, most of its letters burned out, leaving only Mo-El flickering in the rain. Windows were either shattered or boarded up. The parking lot was empty, except for an old Savin covered in dirt and rust. Daniel's cop instincts kicked in. This place was wrong. Too quiet, too still. He parked the patrol car a block away and moved on foot. He didn't want to spook Leah, or worse, alert whoever might be watching. With his hand on his holstered gun, he crept up to the motel's entrance. Then, a sound, a faint cough. Someone was inside. Heart pounding, he pushed through the door. The smell of mildew and stale air hit him instantly. The lobby was barely recognizable. Dust-covered furniture, broken ceiling tiles, and a flickering hallway light that barely lit the space. Then he saw her. Leah Mercer. She was huddled in a corner, wrapped in a thin, dirty coat, her face pale and frantic. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't eaten or slept in days. The moment she saw him, she flinched. Leah, Daniel said gently, raising his hands. It's me, Officer Hayes. I found your son. He's safe. Tears immediately filled her eyes. You found him, she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel nodded. Yes, he's at the hospital. But right now, we need to get you out of here. You're in danger. She shook her head violently. No, I can't leave. They're watching me. Daniel's jaw tightened. Who? She opened her mouth, but before she could answer, a car engine roared outside. Then, headlights flooded through the motel windows. Daniel's blood turned to ice. "Shit," he muttered. "Leah, get behind me." She trembled, backing into the shadows. The car doors slammed. Then, footsteps. Daniel drew his gun. A wolf in the dark. The motel door creaked open, and in walked Michael Stanton. Except this time, he wasn't alone. Two large men in suits flanked him, their movements too controlled. Bodyguards. Hired muscle. And Michael. He looked calm. Too calm. Well, he mused, hands in his pockets. "I was wondering when you'd find her, Officer Hayes." Daniel didn't lower his gun. "Stay right where you are, Stanton." His voice was deadly calm. "You're trespassing on private property, and unless you want me to charge you with conspiracy to commit harm, I suggest you back the hell up." Michael smirked. "Daniel," he said smoothly, "you don't understand. Leah belongs to me." Daniel's stomach twisted. Leah whimpered behind him. "I had told you, Michael," she stammered. "I don't want this. I don't want you. You need to let me go." Michael's eyes darkened. "Leah, sweetheart," he said, his voice silk and poison. "You know that's not an option. You're carrying my child." Daniel's blood ran cold. What did he just say? Carrying my child. Leah's entire body shook. Daniel turned sharply to her. "Leah, is he telling the truth?" Tears slid down her face. I just found out before I ran. I didn't want to be trapped in his world again. I couldn't." Daniel's heart pounded. This wasn't just about one abandoned baby. Leah had been running because she was pregnant again. Michael stepped forward, his smirk growing sharper. "Now, officer, why don't you be smart and hand her over? You've played the hero long enough." Daniel cocked his gun. "Take one more step," he warned, "and I swear to God, you won't be walking out of here." Michael's smirk disappeared. For the first time, he looked genuinely angry. "You have no idea what you're getting into, Hayes," he said coldly. "You think you're saving her. You're just delaying the inevitable. The Stanton family gets what it wants." "Not tonight," Daniel growled. And before Michael could react, red and blue lights exploded outside. Sirens. Detective Ryan Davis had arrived. And he wasn't alone. More officers stormed in, guns raised. Michael froze. His bodyguards reached for their weapons. "Don't move," Ryan shouted, gun trained on them. The room exploded into chaos. One of Michael's men lunged. Daniel slammed him against the wall. Another officer tackled the second bodyguard. Michael tried to run, but Ryan caught him by the collar. "You're not going anywhere, asshole," Ryan snarled, slamming him into the ground. Daniel turned. Leah was shaking, staring in shock. "It's over," Daniel told her. "You're safe." And for the first time in years, Leah believed it. Varied secrets unraveled. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the dark, desolate parking lot outside the abandoned motel. Rain drizzled onto the pavement, washing away the remnants of the night's chaos. Officers swarmed the scene, their radios crackling with updates as Michael Stanton and his men were shoved into the backs of police cruisers. But despite the arrests, Daniel Hayes knew it wasn't over. Not even close. Michael hadn't panicked. He hadn't begged, fought back, or even tried to make a deal. Instead, as they cuffed him and shoved him into the squad car, he had smirked at Daniel. A slow, knowing smirk, like he had already won. And that's what scared Daniel the most. Leah's breaking point. Inside the motel, Leah Mercer sat on the worn-out couch, arms wrapped around herself. Her entire body trembled, her eyes distant, as if she were still trapped in her own personal hell. Daniel crouched in front of her. "Leah, it's over. He's in custody." She let out a broken laugh, shaking her head. "No, Officer Hayes. It's never over. Not with him. Not with the Stantons." Her voice was haunted. Daniel had dealt with abusive partners, stalkers, and powerful men who thought they were untouchable. But something about this case felt different. darker. Then tell me, he said gently. Help me understand. Leah hesitated, biting her lip so hard he thought it might bleed. Finally, she whispered, I was never supposed to have those babies. Daniel's stomach tightened. Babies. Plural. I don't understand, he said carefully. What do you mean? She looked up at him, eyes shining with unshed tears. The first time I got pregnant, she whispered, Michael wasn't angry. He was excited, but not because he wanted a family. He wanted an heir. Someone to carry on the Stanton name. Someone he could mold into his perfect image ***. She let out a shaky breath. But when I told him I wasn't ready, that I wanted out, that's when the threats started. He said I didn't have a choice, that I would be a Stanton whether I wanted to or not. Daniel clenched his jaw. He knew where this was going. I ran, she whispered. The first time, I barely made it 2 weeks before he found me. He dragged me back, made me promise I'd never leave again. And when I lost the baby at 5 months, he didn't care. Daniel felt something inside him crack. The bastard hadn't even cared that she lost their child. Leah took a deep breath, as if forcing herself to continue. When I got pregnant again, I knew I couldn't stay. Not another second. I faked a doctor's appointment, stole whatever cash I could, and ran. This time, I knew he wouldn't let me come back. Not alive, at least. Daniel's grip tightened on his notepad. That's why you ended up in that alley, isn't it? You were hiding. She nodded slowly. I didn't have anywhere to go. I was in pain, contractions were starting, and she choked on the words. I thought if I left him, my baby would be safe. That's why I left him there. In that dumpster. I thought someone, anyone, would find him before Michael did. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I was wrong. He found me anyway. Daniel's chest tightened. Michael hadn't been searching for Leah out of love. He had been hunting her down like an animal, and that meant there was something even bigger at play. A legacy of control. Detective Ryan Davis entered the motel room, shaking off the rain from his coat. His face was grim. You're gonna want to hear this, he told Daniel. Leah tensed immediately. What is it? Ryan exhaled, flipping open his notes. So I did some digging. Turns out, Michael Stanton's father, Richard Stanton, was a real piece of work. Guy wasn't just rich, he built half this city. Daniel frowned. And? Ryan looked directly at Leah. And there's a pattern. She paled. What do you mean? Ryan hesitated before he spoke again. Leah, you're not the first woman to go missing after getting pregnant by a Stanton. The room went deathly silent. Leah's breath caught. What? Ryan continued. Over the last 3 decades, at least 5 other women have disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Every single one of them was either pregnant or rumored to be carrying a Stanton heir. And get this, none of them were ever found. Leah visibly shuddered. Are you saying they killed them? Ryan's expression darkened. We don't know. But here's what we do know. The Stanton family doesn't just get rid of problems. They erase them. Daniel's stomach turned. This wasn't just about Michael Stanton. It was about power, legacy, control. And Leah was never meant to escape. A deal with the devil. Before Daniel could process everything, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered, instantly on edge. This is Hayes. A calm, authoritative voice came through. Officer Hayes, I suggest you stop looking into my family's business. Daniel's blood ran cold. Who is this? A chuckle. Someone who can make your life very difficult. You've done enough. You have the girl. Let it go. Daniel's jaw clenched. You really think I'm just going to walk away? You think I'll let you get away with this? Silence. Then, oh, Officer Hayes, you haven't even begun to understand what you're dealing with. The line went dead. Daniel slammed his fist against the wall. Ryan was already looking at him. That was Richard Stanton, wasn't it? Daniel nodded slowly. Leah was still trembling. "They're never going to stop," she whispered. "Are they?" Daniel looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, the exhaustion, and in that moment, he made a decision. They weren't going to run. They were going to fight. "Leah," he said firmly, "we're going to take them down. All of them. You're not alone in this anymore." She swallowed hard. "How?" Daniel's expression hardened. "By doing what they never expected," he said. "We bring them into the light." And for the first time in years, Leah had hope. The reckoning. The rain had slowed, leaving the city coated in a shimmering, eerie calm. The night air still carried the tension of what had transpired. The arrests, the chase, the revelations. But Daniel Hayes knew the fight was far from over. This wasn't just about a rescued baby anymore. This was about unearthing decades of buried secrets, bringing down one of the most powerful families in the city, and making sure Leah Mercer and her child would never have to run again. The Stanton family had been untouchable for years, but that was about to change, and it would start tonight. The first shot fired. Detective Ryan Davis leaned against his car, flipping through the case file they had compiled. His brow furrowed as he read through the reports. 5 missing women, all linked to the Stanton family. No bodies, no investigations, no arrests, he muttered. Every single one of these cases just disappeared. Daniel stood beside him, arms crossed. Because they had power, they controlled the police, the courts, the city. He shook his head. Hell, even now Michael Stanton is sitting in a holding cell like he's not worried at all. Ryan exhaled. "It's not him we need to worry about." Daniel nodded. Richard Stanton, Michael's father, the real puppet master. They had rattled his cage, but Richard had resources, connections. The phone call Daniel had received earlier wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of war. "Do we have enough to charge him?" Daniel asked. Ryan hesitated. "Not yet, but we have a trail. The Stanton family has covered their tracks well, but there's one thing they can't erase: paperwork. Every crime leaves a money trail." Daniel's eyes sharpened. "Then we need to find it." Leah stepped forward from the shadows of the parking lot, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked worn down but determined. "I think I know where to start," she said quietly. Ryan and Daniel turned to her. Leah took a deep breath. "I remember Michael keeping documents, contracts, records of people the family paid off. He was always careful, but I saw him using a safe, hidden inside his father's private estate." Daniel's heart pounded. "How do you know this?" Ryan asked, narrowing his eyes. Leah swallowed. "Because I lived there. I was supposed to be his wife." Silence fell between them. Then Daniel nodded. "That safe could be our smoking gun." But getting into Stanton Manor, Ryan let out a dry laugh. "That's suicide. It's probably more secure than a damn police station." Leah stood her ground. "Then let's break the rules," she said. Daniel met her gaze. "You're sure about this?" Leah's expression hardened. "They took everything from me. It's time I take something back." Breaking into the lion's den, Stanton Manor loomed in the distance, a fortress of power and corruption. It was a massive estate, surrounded by stone walls, guarded by security patrols. But the real danger wasn't the guards or the cameras. It was Richard Stanton himself. The man was a ghost when it came to criminal activity. No fingerprints, no direct ties. He let others do his dirty work. That's what made him dangerous. Daniel, Ryan, and Leah sat in an unmarked police car, parked half a mile from the estate. Ryan looked at Daniel. "Tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve us getting shot." Daniel cracked his knuckles. "We need 2 things, a distraction and an extraction." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "And how do we do that?" Daniel turned to Leah. "Do you know if Michael had any cameras in his office?" She nodded. "Yes, but he kept physical copies of everything important. He didn't trust digital storage." Daniel grinned. Then let's make some noise. The heist begins. Step 1. Create chaos. Ryan made the call. Minutes later, a fire alarm blared from inside the estate. Red emergency lights flashed as staff and guards scrambled to respond. Leah exhaled sharply. That's our window. Daniel nodded. Let's move. Using the cover of the chaos, they slipped through the back entrance, avoiding the main patrols. The halls were empty. Servants and security were all rushing to the fire alarm. Leah led the way, her movements quick and precise. They reached Michael's office. Daniel pulled out his lock-picking kit. Within seconds, the door clicked open. Inside, the office was pristine. Dark wood, polished glass, and a massive bookshelf hiding a reinforced safe. That's it, Leah whispered, pointing at the safe. Ryan pulled out his phone, inputting the stolen Stanton security codes. The lock disengaged. They opened it. And inside, a treasure trove of secrets. Stacks of documents, bank transfers, bribes, evidence of payouts to corrupt officials. And at the very bottom, files on the missing women. Daniel's stomach twisted. He picked up a yellowed folder. Inside were photos of women, young, frightened, their medical records, their pregnancy reports. And then, a final document. His blood ran cold. It was a contract. Termination of subject. Case number 6. Ryan's eyes darkened. Jesus Christ. Daniel turned to Leah. Her face had gone pale. Case number 6. That was her. She was supposed to be the 6th woman erased. A wave of nausea hit her. If she hadn't run, she'd be dead. She looked up at Daniel, her voice shaking. We have everything we need, she whispered. Let's go. The Stanton Empire falls. Hours later, back at the precinct, Daniel and Ryan handed over the evidence to the Attorney General. It was enough. Warrants were issued. The media exploded with reports on the dark empire of the Stanton family. And by sunrise, Richard Stanton was arrested. Michael Stanton was denied bail. The entire corrupt machine collapsed. The missing women's families finally got justice. And Leah Mercer, she was finally free. One last goodbye. Days later, Leah stood in the hospital, holding her baby boy. Daniel stood beside her. You did it, he said softly. She smiled, tears in her eyes. No, we did it. He watched as she looked down at her son, the child who had survived impossible odds. He needs a name, Daniel said after a moment. Leah's eyes softened. She looked at him. I was thinking, Luke. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Luke. She nodded, because the man who saved him thought he deserved a name. Daniel swallowed hard. Leah took his hand. And I want him to grow up knowing that no matter how dark the world gets, there will always be people like you. Daniel blinked back emotion. Luke cooed softly in his mother's arms. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel Hayes believed in hope again. A new beginning and the shadows that linger. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city, casting golden streaks across the skyline. The storm from the previous night had washed away the grime, leaving the streets smelling of rain and renewal. But for Daniel Hayes, Leah Mercer, and little Luke, the storm hadn't just been weather. It had been a battle for survival, one that had exposed a legacy of corruption, taken down one of the most powerful families in the city, and rewritten the future of an innocent child. And yet, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. The trial of a dynasty. 1 week later, the trial of Richard Stanton and Michael Stanton dominated the media. Headlines screamed about the horrific secrets of the Stanton family, detailing decades of disappearances, abuse, and cover-ups. Prosecutors had more than enough evidence to bury the entire family. Leah watched from the courthouse balcony, her fingers tightening around the railing. Below, reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras flashing, their microphones catching every second of the downfall of the empire that once controlled everything. Michael sat in the courtroom, expression blank, suit pristine, still clinging to the illusion of untouchable wealth. But when Leah's eyes shifted to Richard Stanton, the true monster behind it all, a cold shiver ran down her spine. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't angry. He was just watching. Watching her, watching Daniel, watching everyone. And that's when she knew. This wasn't over. The warning. That night, Daniel was at his apartment, sitting in his chair, sipping on a cup of coffee while reviewing case files. Luke was safe in protective custody with Leah, under round-the-clock police watch. Everything should have been fine. And yet, his instincts screamed otherwise. His phone buzzed. Unknown caller. He answered cautiously. "This is Hayes." A low chuckle. "Hello, Officer Hayes. I was hoping we'd get a moment to speak before the next phase begins." Daniel's body went rigid. "I assume by now you understand that I am not a man who simply disappears." Richard Stanton. Daniel gritted his teeth. "You're going to rot in prison, Stanton. You and your son. Whatever hold you had over this city, it's gone." Another laugh. Calm, methodical, unbothered. "Oh, detective, you truly don't understand power, do you? Prison is just a delay, a minor inconvenience." Daniel stood up, jaw clenched. "What do you want?" Silence. Then, "I want you to know that I never forget debts. You, that woman, and that child. You took something from me. And I will take something back." Daniel's blood ran cold. Then the call went dead, and Daniel realized they were still in danger, a ghost in the dark. Leah was staying in a secure, undisclosed location under police protection, but Daniel didn't trust anyone else to make sure she was safe. He drove across the city, every nerve in his body on high alert. When he arrived, the safe house was dark except for the faint glow of a lamp inside. 2 officers were stationed at the front, but something felt wrong. He stepped out of the car, instincts screaming. One of the officers nodded. "She's inside, sir. Everything's quiet." Too quiet. Daniel stepped inside. Leah sat in a chair, holding Luke, her face illuminated by the lamp. She looked up, eyes wary. "Daniel, what's wrong?" He took a breath, scanning the room. "I need to check something." He walked to the window, pulled the curtain back, and froze. On the opposite rooftop, under the dim streetlights, stood a figure. Tall, dressed in black, face obscured by shadows. But Daniel didn't need to see his face to know. They were being watched. "Get down," Daniel barked, pulling his gun. The window shattered as a bullet ripped through the glass. Leah screamed. Daniel tackled her to the ground, shielding her and Luke as another gunshot rang out. The officers outside returned fire. By the time Daniel got back up, the figure on the rooftop was gone, vanished into the night. But he left something behind. A single playing card, stuck into the broken glass. Daniel's stomach turned. The King of Spades, and written on the back, in neat, chilling handwriting. "The game is not over." The next move. The attack made one thing clear. Richard Stanton wasn't just a corrupt businessman. He was something worse. A man with loyalists, with operatives, with a network so deep that even from behind bars, he could still pull the strings. And he had just declared war. Leah sat on the couch, still shaking, cradling Luke. "He's never going to stop, is he?" Daniel looked at the shattered window, at the playing cards sitting on the floor. "No," he said quietly. "He won't." Ryan arrived minutes later, jaw clenched as he assessed the damage. "We need to move them. Now. This safe house is compromised." Daniel nodded. "We also need to dig deeper." Richard Stanton wasn't working alone. Someone out there is still doing his bidding. Ryan hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I think we both know the answer to that." Daniel exhaled. "Michael Stanton." Ryan nodded. "Even locked up, he still has contacts. He's not out of the game yet. Leah clutched Luke tighter. So what do we do? Daniel looked at her, then at the baby she had fought so hard to protect. We finish this, he said, once and for all. And in that moment, he knew. This wasn't just about protecting Leah and Luke. This was about ending the Stanton family's reign of terror forever. Because if they didn't take Stanton down completely, he would come back for them. And next time, no one would be safe.